The Mongolian People's Republic, often known as Outer Mongolia, is at an important stage of its transformation. Once a country dominated by nomadic herdsmen, it's now becoming a self-sufficient agricultural and industrial nation. Our second film, like the first, was made with the help of Professor Owen Lattimore, the Western expert on Mongolia. As our advisor, he helped us negotiate an agreement with the Mongolians to make our films. This agreement made it clear that whilst we could use our own cameraman and sound recordist, we would always be accompanied by an interpreter and a television organizer who would supervise both the subject matter and the shots we took. Since we were the first Western television team to be allowed into Mongolia to make films, the Mongolian side was extremely anxious that we should present the best possible image of their country. This film was the result of two journeys we made with Professor Lattimore, the first in the summer of 1974 and the second in the following winter.
The Mongolian People's Republic began with the revolution of 1921. The population is a little less than 1.5 million, of whom a quarter live in the capital city of Ulaanbaatar. Lenin himself, in the early 1920s, drafted a theory of how pre-capitalistic countries could reach socialism without going through the capitalist stage if they leaned on the support of an advanced country, which Lenin intended to make out of Russia. And there was an interview between Lenin and some Mongol representatives in which he spoke of the methods by which this theory could be specifically applied to Mongolia. And for more than 50 years, the Mongols have followed that course. They're extremely proud of it, that they are the oldest example of this Leninist theory. It's just 30 years since I first visited this city of Ulaanbaatar. That was in 1944 during the war, and almost none of the modern buildings you see today were here at that time. The reason for a city here at all is historically very interesting. The old name that you find in the travel books is Urga, which is a foreign mispronunciation of a Mongol word meaning residence. It was because it was the residence of the greatest of the so-called living Buddhas of Mongolia. Now, as with all the other great monasteries, as soon as there was a fixed center, a small Chinese trading settlement grew up close to it. The church, in fact, could be called a kind of clerical feudalism. It owned lands, it owned herds and flocks, and these were tended for the temple monasteries by serfs who were bound to the land, were not allowed to leave the jurisdiction of the church. Consequently, when Mongolia attempted and achieved a partial independence in 1911, and finally achieved real independence in the revolution of 1921, the question of church and state became extremely important. The Mongols moved in a way curiously similar to that of Henry VIII in England. That is, instead of suppressing religion as such, they expropriated the monastery lands, and the church, once it was impoverished, had no more power. Of course, as always happens in revolution, there was a period of violence and excess. One has only to look at the old abbeys of England to realize the similar cultural loss to England from similar policies. But as things are now, there is one monastery still functioning in Ulaanbaatar and, remarkable to note, maintained by state subsidy. It's a good deal more than 40 years now since I saw for the first time a Naadam, or great public festival of games, horse racing, wrestling, and so on. The continuation of these traditions transformed into celebrations of anniversaries of the Republic, anniversaries of the Revolution, is a most interesting aspect of Mongol life today. Wrestlers are presented as winners by heralds who still use the traditional forms of chanting. There is a particular kind of singing that is supposed to encourage and strengthen the spirit of the horse before the child riders go out to start the race. The classical distance for an important horse race is 18 to 20 miles. The jockeys are young, very young. In fact, the retiring age for a jockey is 10 or 12 years old, according to circumstances. Why such long distances ridden by children? Because traditionally, in Mongolia, a race should be won not by a strong jockey who is capable of guiding, pacing, and forcing the horse. It should be won on the merits of the horse itself, its own strength, its own willingness to run. Until recently, it wasn't uncommon for families to ride their mounts into Ulaanbaatar from the outlying provinces, sometimes as much as a fortnight's journey away, to take part in the annual horse race at the Naadam. The winning jockeys of the 6 main races receive awards from the Premier of Mongolia, who is also the first secretary of the party. This year, the winner of the most important national race was ridden by a 7-year-old girl.